Hi everyone, Jay here from JAAD Productions. Welcome back to another video. Today we are returning to the Robotech RPG in a new video series. This is the first one that I'm putting out here, where I'm just going to be covering the system in a lot more detail. I didn't cover the system in a lot of detail during my initial review, and now that quite some time has passed and I've had time to GM it and I've run the game like crazy, even without the Robotech, theming, it is still a fantastic system. It's very, very fantastic role-playing system, probably the most fun and best one I've played in all of my role-playing experiences. So I'm going to be jumping into it, and I'm going to be answering some questions, putting together some helpful little guides for people who want more information on it, people who are looking for clarifications, all that kind of good stuff. So, in today's first video, we will be looking at character creation straight up and explaining that, just in case anyone is confused when they've read the book or is looking to understand how character creation works. I'm not going to read everything out detail by detail. This is a summary and clarification of just what this how it all works, and how the basic concepts work and things to keep in mind when you're doing it. So let's jump into it. So character creation, realistically in this system, should only take about 20 minutes to really do that all down. Most of your time character creating in this particular system goes towards when it comes to what is your character's backstory, what is their personality, how do they think, feel, what do they do, what's their history, all of that. All of the important things. That's where most of your time is actually going to go. But in terms of recording the data, once you have an idea of what you are making, so at least if you have an idea of a character that you're going to begin with, it will only take you 20 minutes to really do it. It's really quick once you get the hang of it, and it's really free-flowing. So, of course, the most important thing to do as part of this is step 1 of character creation, review. So, the first step is always review the story that your GM wants to tell, and know what kind of adventure your GM is running and what kind of restrictions she has for the characters that the player is going to be making. Some adventures, the GM might decide that you're all going to be pilots in a VF squadron and tell this epic story about your squadron throughout the course of one of the Robotech wars, in a bunch of Valkyries in the Macross Saga, or maybe Alpha Fighters, or maybe even just like the Masters Saga, where you'll be like the 15th ATAC, but I don't know, maybe the 16th ATAC. But just check with them what kind of story they're running, so you know what kind of characters you're going to have to make to do this. But in doing that and say that, it's always good to check with your GM, and keep in mind that a lot of this system is all about freedom of the players, and it's all a guide and building blocks to achieve that end goal of that cinematic storytelling and those epic role-playing moments. And for example, going back to the example where you're all playing as, for example, the GM has decided that you're all going to be a squadron-based adventure and you all have to be pilots of Valkyries in your story. That is important to keep in mind. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are locked into the pilot career. It just means that you can, or rather at the end of character creation, you've got to be able to do the thing that the GM wants you to do, otherwise you just don't fit with the story and your character has no reason being there. But in an example, I actually do run a game like this where everyone is part of a squadron and it's the story of their squadron, but in that squadron we have people who are Marine career, we have people who are officer career, we have people who are pilot careers, we have people who are different kind of pilots, which we'll get into in a minute. We have people who are technicians who not only maintain their Valkyries but perform really epic stunts by using some of the technical talents to overcharge some stuff and really use their stuff in creative ways. So you get a really fun, diverse cast, even if you do that, so long as you keep that in mind and realize your players, and as GMs, you don't have to lock them in too hard, and as players, you don't have to be locked in too hard. So that's why it's important to review the story, make sure you know with your GM what kind of adventure he's running, make sure you know what kind of characters that he's got restrictions on. For example, it might not always fit, so do that first. Pretty obvious thing. But it's step 1 in character creation in the book. The next step. Step 2, choosing a race. So, with choosing a race, currently in the Macross Saga book, there are 2 races. Your choices are human and Zentradi. There's no stat differences between the 2 races when they are micronized, i.e. the same size. The aliens in Tradi, they gain different stats when they are in their natural form, the full size as 10-meter tall giants, and that affects their starting speed and their starting wounds. So they are in their natural form, they're very tough to bring down. They're actually quite a challenge for players on foot to bring down. Not impossible, but they are challenging, especially if they're fully outfitted. Can lead to some pretty awesome kind of Attack on Titan stuff. I've had a game where a full party, they were after a rogue Zentradi who was full-sized. He was dwelling in this old area, and he almost would have one-shot them and almost killed the party, but thanks to some very careful and thoughtful planning, they knew they were going in against something that was very tough, and combined with their plan, they managed to bring him down in a very epic and cinematic way, relatively without too much injury caused to the party as a whole. So, then we have step 3. So step 3 is probably the step where you're going to face the most decision anxiety. Step 3 is choosing your career. So, the game asks you to start picking your careers to basically form a base of your character. Each career gives you your starting proficiencies, talent, element, rank, and equipment. The equipment tends to be very general. The proficiencies are what kind of mecha you can fly, what kind of vehicles you can fly. You know, are you trained to pilot a tank or drive a tank? Can you drive a APC? Can you drive a car? That kind of thing. Okay, what kind of things can you drive? And proficiencies, it's important to keep in mind when you're selecting them. Having a proficiency in something, there's no point in taking the same proficiency in the same thing. Having a proficiency in something just means you don't suck at driving it. You can hop into anything and start sort of pedaling and driving around. You might be, good old, if you're a fan of Macross rather than Robotech, you might decide to do a bit of a Basra, jump into a Veritech and start you might be an entertainer, jump into a Veritech. You don't have proficiency in that. So, you're really going to struggle to do some of these maneuvers. You might suffer some negative modifiers while you're flying that. But you can still do it. If you have proficiency in it, it means you don't suck at doing that, and you're not going to suffer any negative modifiers just for flying it. Talents, as I said, your element is also very important. Elements represent basically the area of expertise and training that your character has within said career. And I'll explain that a little bit more, and you'll see that as we go through these careers very quickly and sort of summarize them. But the element is basically, if you're familiar with the old Palladium system, it's closer to that of an, what are they called? MCC? The sub. The MOS. Yes. They're closer to that of an MOS. They're a sub sort of sect that is where the specialization of that particular career comes in. So, the careers are, in order, pilot, officer, technician, entertainer, spy, marine, volunteer. The pilot. So, the pilot career focuses on using mecha and is action-orientated talents. Starts with some pilot talents. It's very good all round. It has lots of proficiency choices, one of which has to be a mecha type. They're very good. It has its elements that allow you to make different kinds of pilot depending on what you really want. You can be the Max Sterling type. You can be the good old Ben Dixon style wingman. And you get the squadron leaders and, being in command of your squadron. So the ace pilot element, you're all about being in your element when you're in direct combat with enemies. Wingman, you're all in your element when you're supporting your fellow flight members, so it's all about supporting your people and working together as a team, as a squadron. Squadron leaders are obviously in their elements when it comes to coordinating and leading their squadrons into battle, and when you're doing actions relating to that. So they're all elements that activate pretty easily so long as you're in your mecha and flying, and that's where the emphasis on the career is. And it's a pretty simple career, it's a nice career. In this career, you get one piloting talent, and your rank and your starting career talent are all tied to which element you pick. So the ace pilot has a more combat-y focused one. The squadron leader has a more let your squadron perform better one with a particularly good one that I love. And the wingman has a very defensive talent in mind when you pick that element to begin with. So you can see how the elements play into there. The officer. So the officer focuses on giving orders, teamwork, assisting allies, and leading the group as a whole and defending your teammates. Their starting talent helps keep other members of the party alive and NPCs alive and work past their limits. It has a large number of proficiencies as well, one of which has to be a naval ship. They tend to lean slightly more towards running the naval ships. They could be good for that kind of thing. The power of this system is you can have people, literally one player be on the SDF-1 in a control room somewhere on a console, and all of his actions in the turn are feeding data to his teammates and relaying orders to them and coordinating them with battlefield and organizing that as the enemies approach on the SDF-1, and he has to deal with the spot fires that are going on as well as other things as the SDF-1 gets overrun, while the other players are outside in the Veritex dealing with these enemies. So that's a really powerful the system, so that's why that's in there. His elements are all based on the different styles of roleplay and leadership that your officer might have, and they are Exemplar, Marshal, and Coordinator elements. They're pretty self-explanatory. They'll act like the elements, you know. They also start at a higher rank than pretty much every other career. So rank in this basically determines what you can have. Most mecha and equipment has a rank associated with it. If you're not that rank, you can't requisition it. So the officer actually has access to a host of equipment pretty much off the bat. So then we have the technician. So the technicians are essential specialists who have less combat-focused starting talents and are more focused on supporting players. They've got more limited proficiency options, but their primary starting talent is a great get-out-of-jail-free card to save on a crucial skill test related to their vocation. Rank is determined by your element with this career, and then the elements are very much divided into three generalist of specialist supports: doctors, engineers, and scientists. I think you can imagine when those elements activate. So in this way, the technician lets you build a career where you're very much, it's the support class. It knows how to, with the scientist, it's that person, he knows his lore, he knows his technology, he knows how this works. The engineer, he's going to be fixing your mecha in the field. Your doctor, he's going to be able to patch up your guys and heal people and apply medical aid to civilians and refugees you might encounter, that kind of examples. So they're excellent supporting career right off the base stat, and they are very open in how they build out. You might build your technician to be maybe something like an anthropologist or a psychologist. A whole bunch of different things you can do with the technician with these elements, because it is possible to create your own elements, but that is something I will say for a future video. Entertainer. So the entertainer is essentially the bard, probably the hardest career to start off with, very much a civilian in terms of if you're thinking of what you're going to be running. However, as the entertainer, I particularly really love the career, and I've actually done a really funny thing in a game where I am a player, and that I've made a Zentradi ace pilot who uses the entertainer career as his building block. And his whole premise is that by flashily killing and defeating enemies only with a battle pod, he basically inspires through his actions and words allies, and that's how I get around some of the things. But it's essentially a bard. It's very good in social occasions. It only has a single element that's very flexible and usable in almost any social occasion. It has almost no proficiency option. It only has one proficiency option, and that's only for personal motor vehicles. So you can drive a car or a bike. That's it. So you, if it takes a bit of investment to really get to make the entertainer super combat focused. So be mindful with that when you pick it with your career and you're planning something really strange like that. But overall, its career talent gives a fantastic buff that's absolutely awesome, and pretty much affects the whole party for an entire round, so long as they can see and hear you, and it can stack to do some really cool things and make your guys really just inspire them, force of arms style. You can be the Min-Mei singing, and everyone else out there fighting for freedom, love, and justice can just absolutely wreck face for a turn. It's really fantastic. But it can be really good with your imagination. When you're taking the entertainer, if you're not doing the typical entertainer, like a movie star or singer or magician, make sure you run it past your GM, like when you do crazy stuff like my example. So then you have the Spy. Spy is a rogue type with a penchant for stealth and subterfuge. They're very flexible to proficiency options from a nice selection. They have nice elements depending on what kind of shady character you want to be, with the Shade, In Plain Sight, and the Copycat. The In Plain Sight is pretty much well, the shade is very much the I am the knight, Batman in the shadows. The in plain sight is you're basically is very good for con man along with copycats. But the in plain sight is you're a spy. You hide in plain sight. You blend in with crowds. You very much that. The copycat is pretending to be someone you're not, studying people, that kind of thing. The basic talent allows you to have a chance to save yourself if your Mission Impossible plan, so during your stealth escapades, actually accidentally gets screwed over and goes wrong during a bad dice roll. And they make pretty much a career for the building block of being a shadowy assassin, a killer, a con man, any kind of thing, and are great for lying and bluffing past people. And they are very good in social and combat encounters. The Marine is basically a combat powerhouse that is the opposite of the pilot, which is focused on personal hand-to-hand combat outside of a mecha. Don't let that fool you, though. They still excel in combat, period. It's just they're better when they are on foot with light weapons fighting other things. They excel in combat. They have a few proficiency options. They have to take from the tactical tree, which is also the tactical tree of talent is very much more about personal combat and your physical strength. So this is where Marines are. They're all about physicality, whereas the pilots are all about the mecha and performing the best in the mecha. They have a very powerful talent that is great whether solo or in a team. It's a great, basically, if you're behind, use it. It's supposed to be used once per encounter. I actually got a clarification on that from the game makers. Currently in the book, I think it needs to be errated. But it is a very, very powerful talent that lets you get 2 bonus actions. Bonus actions are very rare in the system so far, so they're particularly good with that. And basically, your elements for this are all Lone Wolf, so you're effective when you're by yourself, Assaulter when you're taking the fight to the enemy, or Suppressor when you're laying down, covering fire, and covering your corners and defending your position. And that's all to help you be the best kind of Rambo you want to be. Last career, Volunteer. Volunteer is a generalist build that basically is an all-rounder made of clay, ready to be shaped into whatever you want. The price of freedom means that you have very few proficiency options. You have low rank or no rank as you're probably a civilian to begin with. Your starting talent is pretty cool. It basically lets you pick another career's talent that they start with, another career talent. So, for example, you could pick a volunteer and you'd be like, okay, my volunteer, he got caught up in the SDF-1 when it space folded, he joined the military. Level 1, I'm a volunteer. I'm going to take the ace pilot one, just as a nice grab me, and so he's very flexible. And the elements here are very obscure and interesting and different. It's very much a playpen for building something that the others don't let you want or don't really inspire you to do. So keep that in mind. It's very much the everyman, and so you end up with the elements are caretaker, introvert, and adrenaline junkie. Introvert is an interesting one. I actually had some place question on that. Introvert is essentially you're in your element when you're focused on one task. So if you try to do multiple things in a round, you're not in your element. So there's that. Just a quick little tidbit from someone who's had that question come up multiple times from people who have tried to make volunteers with the introvert element. So I feel like I should very much point out now that we've talked about the careers, that the careers are not meant to be super literal, but they're meant to be used to form an archetype for your character. So a former hitman for the mob may build his character using a spy or the marine career as part of that building block. A pilot or a marine may actually build their character with a more technical approach. So you might have a pilot who's a VF, Valkyrie pilot squadron, part of a squadron, who's actually used the technician career, and they've used engineer, and they approach combat through far more technical means. They use gadgets, and they overload their systems, and they tinker with their Veritech and mess with its systems to create explosive effects by using the technician career as a base. The emphasis is on creativity, and careers are a base building block guide, okay? They are used to form your archetypes. Don't look at them too literally. Next, we go on to step 4 of character creation, skills. So, Skills, at level 1, you pick 6 of them from the large list of skills within the book. 4 at level 0 if you're doing that kind of play. It's important to keep in mind that when you're picking these skills, they are umbrella skills. So when you're asked for a skill test or making an action in combat or any other kind of social occasion or technical challenge with these skills, you can use any skill for any task so long as you can justify in your description of what you're doing to your GM how and what your character is using those skills to accomplish. Sorry. How you are using those skills to accomplish that feat that you're going for. So, I'll say it again. Any skill can be used for any kind of test, so long as you can justify how you are using that skill to the GM to perform the desired action that you're after. So, rapid fire can be used as an example. You can use it to justify suppressing an enemy You can use it to justify suppressing an enemy as easily as you can justify using it to hurl a bucket load of insults at, say, a very important person at a dinner party to distract them, while your friends sneak up upstairs to get some dirt on him. Or you might use rapid fire to justify a technical problem that you're facing, where you've got a computer based on the situation, and you use rapid fire to try and get it working as your skill, and your justification is you're taking all the cables and you're just randomly plugging things in like crazy to try and get the thing working in time before you all get exploded. So, every skill can be used for any kind of test. The skills, the important thing to do is to keep in mind when you're picking your skills and when you're using and justifying your skills and describing how you use them, keep in mind the benefit and cost listed next to the skills. Those are there to help you guide your justification. And then the GM will either respond by asking you to select a different skill, saying that your justification doesn't work, or they might say go for it, and then they'll apply some modifiers. Your skills might be perfect, your description might be really creative, imaginative, and be really, super appropriate, so they might give you some bonus, some positive modifiers, or your skills might technically work, but your GM might go, I'm going to give you some negative modifiers. But the point is, when you're picking your skills, and you're reading them, keep in mind their benefit and their cost, and how you imagine your character having these skills and using them to justify what your character tries to accomplish during their skill tests. So, next step 5, skill value. So, this is pretty simple. You assign a value to each of your skills. Each skill has to have a value of 1 minimum and a total, or a maximum of 4 at level 1. Over the course of the system, as you level up, the maximum you can get a single skill to is 6, which is very powerful and very expensive in terms of level up XP spending on it. There are a number of ways you can assign the skill value based on the book. Check with your GM what his preferred one is. There's everything from random rolling to stat arrays to point assignment. But the important thing is to remember, at level 1, each skill needs to have a value of 1. And each skill can have no higher than a value of 4. And what the value of the skill is that value is how many dice, because this is a D6 system, where you roll pools of D6, that value is how many dice that skill lets you roll. So, step 6, nature. With nature, this step is relatively simple. But it can be a real challenge for players, I've noticed, because it asks some questions about your character's role-playing style and their personality. So, you pick 2 terms to describe your character's nature, their disposition and their demeanor, essentially picking their personality. And this kind of works as like an alignment, as you would see in other games, and it's a guide for role-playing. For example, you might make your character, and they have the calm and backstabbing, for example. Let's use that. Let's say those are 2 terms that you decide make up your nature. And so they're there basically on your character sheet to remind you that, okay, yep, the nature of my guy, he is calm, So when I'm role-playing, be calm. That's what he does. And then he's also backstabbing, so that's another part of his nature to keep in mind when I'm role-playing him. And then, in order to reward you for role-playing to these natures, when you are taking an action and you're convinced that you're role-playing to your nature, you can say to the GM that, you can ask them that I'm role-playing to my nature, can I have a reroll? And you can get a once per encounter reroll if you're playing to your nature. So, for example, if you do something in the middle of a combat that you really fudge the dice roll on, it gets really bad, you rolled all nothing but ones, you might say, well, my action that I'm doing, I'm playing to my nature because my action that I'm doing is very selfish and it's endangering my fellow players. And so I believe I'm playing to my backstabbing nature, and the GM go, yep, okay, you're role-playing to your nature, and then you'll get to re-roll those dice, that re-roll. You'll get to re-roll that action. So, step 7, talents. Now, this is something that a lot of players have missed every time I've made characters with them. I've made a lot of characters now with a lot of different players. It seems to be a consistent one that people miss, because it's just tucked away there in the rules, but at the end of character creation, you should always have, at level 1, 3 talents. So, you will always have 1 career talent. Your career will always specify that you have to take a talent from a different tree. For example, the pilot. Let's use the pilot example here. When you're making a pilot as your career, it will say you have to have the career talent associated with your element. So with the ace pilot, it's the time shot. Then it says you have to take a talent from the piloting tree in the piloting section of the book. Okay, you have to take one of those talents. And then later in character creation, you then get to take a third one, which is actually technically step 7 if you follow along in the book. You take a third talent, and this can be from any talent section tree. It can be from any of them. It's a third talent that you just get to take. But it's very important to keep in mind you're selling yourself short, because at level 1, you should have 3 talents. Level 0, you'll only have 1. So, and it'll be this one. Next, step 8, wounds. So, HP is pretty simple. A human-sized person has 3 light class wounds. The lowest class of basically wounds and structure that is in this book. All damage, armor, structure, HP is all basically shifted into 3 damage classes. So there's light class, mecha class, naval class, humans, squishy, right at the bottom, light class. Don't let this confuse you. It's 3 light class wounds, and now the wounds are designated brawl and critical. And now the concept of brawl and critical here is basically the brawl it's a way of indicating how hurt you are in terms of taking these wounds. And the key difference here is if you read later in the book during more rulesy sections towards the back, brawl wounds heal quickly, critical wounds take longer to recover. That is the key difference. Critical wounds are critical wounds. When you're on your critical wounds, you're in trouble, and it's going to take a long time to heal. Brawl wounds, they come back and they heal pretty easily. But they are light class. That is the distinction there. And just important to point out, read it later in the book when it comes to character deaths and all that, and losing wounds and all that. But essentially, you're going down to 0 wounds, you're down and out, you go into negatives, you're just dead. Keep that in mind. Step 9, burnout. So, every character, no matter what their, whether they're level 0 or level 1, unless you're starting at a higher level, doesn't matter. And for character creation, before you apply anything such as, if you're starting your characters at a higher level or anything, it's always a burnout value of 5. Okay? When you use your skills to make a dice roll, if any single dice roll that they would make over the course of the round would exceed the burnout value, for every dice over that burnout value that you roll, you take 1 point of fatigue on your stress tracker. So, this is where fatigue comes in, and something I'll talk about in my next video when I break down some of the more gameplay elements that players often ask questions about, and to summarize. So, we have that, and so, again, it's for every dice you go over the burnout value with. However, it's also important to note that equipment suites, which is something I'll also cover in the future, never count towards burnout. And, as you'll learn later, every time you're in a combat, for example, an encounter, you can use up to 2 skills to make 2 actions, basically, over a round, and 1 equipment suite. So, 2 actions, and 1 equipment suite. The equipment suite never counts towards your burnout. Step 10, you record how fast you are. It's very simple. There's 2 different speeds listed depending on whether or not you're human / Zentradi micronized, or if you're a big Zentradi. Step 11, enhancement. So, step 11, enhancement, is very simple. You get 5 enhancement points. You cannot save these points. Any points that you don't spend by the end of character creation are lost. And then, listed under this are a range of different enhancements to help flesh out your character. So, they all have different costs. Keep that in mind. Make sure you read them carefully, but it's important to note that despite how many enhancement points you have, you can only purchase each enhancement option once. So, there's the enhancement option that lets you purchase proficiency. It only costs 1 enhancement point. You can only take that once. You can't spend all 5 of your enhancement points on 5 new proficiencies at level 1. Okay? So, that is actually it. That's the end of character creation. The rest of it is making your backstory and fleshing out your character's details and personality and their history and all that. All the good, fun, role-playing stuff that's all fantastic and love, and I always enjoy barking at players and saying, please give me your backstory. The more backstory you give me, the more I will reward you. But that is it. That is the end of character creation. If you're going through it super fast and you know exactly what you're doing, it will only take you 20 minutes. It's really quick, really simple, really easy once you understand it. I have been Jay from JAAD Productions. Thank you for listening. Now, if you have questions and would like to know more about this, you can do one of 2 things. You can leave a comment below here on YouTube, or in the description, there is a link to a Discord for JAAD Productions where you can come in and ask questions, get real-time responses from me. So you can ask that through that. And that is that. Join us next time in my next video where I will be talking about skill challenges, proficiency, dramas, heroic moves, equipment suites, and kits. Okay, I've been Jay from JAAD Productions. I will see you in the next video.